March 23, 1994. Luis Donaldo Colosio was a politician, economist, and member of the Institutional Revolutionary Party, better known as the Institutional Revolutionary Party. Colosio held several positions within the political hierarchy. He served as a deputy, senator, party president, and head of Mexico's Social Development Secretariat. The last thing he wanted was the presidency, but he only ended up in the candidacy. He to the presidency, but he only ended up in the candidacy. On March 23, 1994, Colosio was assassinated. Colosio belonged to the Institutional Revolutionary Party. The Institutional Revolutionary Party retained power in Mexico for most of the 20th century. In 1994, the president of Mexico was Carlos Salinas de Gortari, and Colosio had become his protege. How did Colosio become a presidential candidate? In 1988, Colosio was the director of Salinas' successful presidential campaign, and that same year he was named head of the Institutional Revolutionary Party. In 1992, President Salinas appointed Colosio as Secretary of Social Development. By that time, he already had enough power to reform some issues to his liking. His promises to reduce Mexico's widespread poverty were a daily occurrence, but they failed to stop the anti-government guerrilla activity in the state of Chiapas. In 1993, Salinas appointed Colosio as his successor, making him the chosen one of the Institutional Revolutionary Party, and therefore the favorite candidate to win the presidential election scheduled for August of 1994. Now, this part of the story could be detailed a bit more because everything has to do with the outcome of the events. Colosio's presidential candidacy emerged under an informal procedure known as destype. This way in which candidates were born was already accustomed during the Institutional Revolutionary Party governments. In theory, almost 2 years before the election, the media began to handle the names of those who could be the Institutional Revolutionary Party candidates, obviously all belonging to the cabinet of the current president. This mechanism in which the candidate emerged was known as the finger pointing. For more than 50 years, being a one-party system, the unveiled one was generally known as the next president. Therefore, the presidential campaign was just a formality. This explains part of the great systematic damage that this attack caused to the Mexican political regime. Although as early as 1988 there had been a sufficiently competitive electoral process, which is even presumed to have been fraudulent, Colosio was seen as the successor to Carlos Salinas. The unveiling of 1993 complied punctually with all the unwritten rules. The Institutional Revolutionary Party announced the support of the worker, peasant, and popular sectors in favor of Luis Donaldo Colosio, reaching the end of 1993 sheltered by the unity of the Institutional Revolutionary Party and an economic environment thanks to the brand new North American Free Trade Agreement among other voters. His team had good omens among the other voters. His team had good omens for their proselytizing campaign. On the first day of 1994, the rebellion broke out. The guerrillas of the Zapatista National Liberation Army took over several towns in the state of Chiapas. They were in combat with the Mexican army for about 12 days. This situation ruined all of Institutional Revolutionary Party's plans. Contradictory data appeared in the media and they did not have a clear strategy. The next day, January 2nd, President Salinas asked Colosio not to start his campaign until the war was resolved and also to avoid proselytizing. On January 10th, an incredible decision emerged that would surprise the entire political class, starting with Colosio himself. The President of the Republic would change course by appointing Manuel Camacho as the Commissioner for Peace in Chiapas. In theory, it was a decision agreed upon with Colosio. However, it was seen as the beginning of the break between the president and his favorite candidate. During the following weeks, with all the media attention focused on the negotiations with the Zapatistas in San Cristobal de las Casas, Colosio conducted his campaign in a cold and somewhat hesitant manner. In early March, there were rumors that Colosio would resign from the Institutional Revolutionary Party candidacy to make way for Manuel Camacho Solis. The tension kept increasing until Carlos Salinas was forced to utter the famous phrase, "Don't get confused, the president is Luis Donaldo." What's curious is that this phrase, instead of calming things down, did just the opposite. Over the months, the president and the Institutional Revolutionary Party candidate showed a clear distancing despite being close collaborators and personal friends. The only meeting known of them in 1994 was on January 27th, then there were no more. In the midst of this complicated environment, Colosio saw an opportunity to increase the chances in his campaign through the act for the 65th anniversary on March 6. In it, Colosio and his team relaunched the campaign. It was an event where there were many people. The monument to the revolution was completely full. Subsequently, among the news and political analysts would affirm that the speech he read that Sunday signified a breaking point of Colosio with Salinas de Gortari. Others would say that it was his death sentence. Part of the speech was inspired by Martin Luther King's I Have a Dream and emphasized values such as democracy, political reform, new federalism, and sovereignty. The politically significant thing was that he proposed a distancing of the Institutional Revolutionary Party from the government, establishing constitutional limits to the presidency by giving more powers to the Congress of the Union. In other words, he was planning a reform of the entire political system. When the assassination of Colosio was discussed, the first thing that had been put at stake, at least in the logistics part, had been the choice of the Lomas Taurinas neighborhood as the venue. This place did not have the minimum security conditions for the attendees or for the candidate and presented multiple problems that would be overlooked. In the investigation file, it was declared that Lomas Taurinas was chosen because it was an eminently institutional Revolutionary Party neighborhood. It represented the urban characteristics of Tijuana with low socioeconomic conditions, and having a natural and easily accessible scenario was representative of the problems of most of the Tijuana neighborhoods. So came the 23rd of March 1994. Beyond the country, apparently calm and optimistic that the president, Carlos Salinas de Gortari, had left at the time of his nomination, had disappeared. The peasant rebellion that erupted in Chiapas, the pressure for political change, and an angry reaction from the hardliners within his party did not change Colosio's plans. The organizers of the event decided to use the back of a truck as the stage for Colosio's speech, as it was an informal event. Around 4 in the afternoon, candidate Colosio was arriving at the plaza of the neighborhood, which 3 months later would bear his name, to give a speech to more than 4,000 people. The polls still showed Colosio comfortably ahead, and that's how the crowd saw him, watching him attentively in the Taurinas hills. The enthusiasm and certainty that he would be their next president was evident. From the truck bed he says to them, "Friends of Tijuana, friends of the working class neighborhoods. This political campaign should allow us on August 21st to give Baja California and our country a leap from the truck and make his way through the crowd. The smile never leaves his face." In the background, La Culebra, a song by the band Machos, was playing. Meanwhile, he leans over the shoulder of his bodyguards to shake hands with the people. The members of the group Orden Balas y Porras, or Grupo Omega, formed by ex-police officers, had the function of creating a second security ring around Colosio. He smiled, greeted, and made his way through the crowd that approached him in droves to hug him or simply see him up close. The security that Colosio had traveled approximately 13 meters. One of the people managed to penetrate the post security to support a Taurus revolver caliber 38 near his right ear and immediately shoot it. The attacker fired another shot that hit the politician in the abdomen, who collapsed unconscious, bleeding from several bullet holes. In the midst of the confusion, the bodyguards captured a man about 25 years old. Part of the personal security took Colosio to the van that was parked on the side. They hadn't even traveled 500 meters when they were reached by an ambulance from the Delta Rescue Group. Domiro Garcia Reyes ordered them to stop to change vehicles. On the other hand, in the esplanade, the rest of the bodyguards surrounded the detainee, identified as Mario Aburto Martinez, to protect him from the enraged attendees who were trying to lynch him. When he was immobilized, the aggressor screamed, "It was the old man! It was the old man!" referring to Vicente Mayoral, one of the members of the security group, who also, after the attack, the ambulance arrived at the General Hospital of Tijuana. After trying to save him, Colosio suffered an irreversible cardiocirculatory arrest. He was declared dead at 1945 hours. Like a lightning bolt, the question was present everywhere. Who killed Colosio? While the videotapes show the moment of Colosio's death, the evidence is vague enough to allow for free interpretations. A factory worker named Mario Aburto Martinez was apprehended at the scene and reportedly confessed to committing the crime while acting alone. But that didn't convince anyone. In the frantic search for conspiracies, some Mexicans pointed to the most powerful traffickers in Tijuana, who were wanted for the still unsolved murder of a Roman Catholic bishop. This has to be said in some way from the Institutional Revolutionary Party. Days later, while saying it in some way from the Institutional Revolutionary Party. Days later, while Colosio's body was being veiled in Mexico City, the Institutional Revolutionary Party members literally engaged in a barely disguised struggle for the vacant candidacy. With Colosio's former campaign chief, Ernesto Zedillo Ponce de Leon, at the head of the Institutional Revolutionary Party ticket, they were still waiting to find out who had been in charge of moving Mario Aburto's hand. While President Salinas swore by Colosio's grave that justice would be fully served, the government's subsequent actions raised doubts among Mexicans. Just days after, government officials described the killer as a lone fanatic. The special prosecutor assigned to the case, Miguel Montes Garcia, shocked the country by announcing that several individuals had helped Aburto approach Colosio in the crowd, theoretically referring to the conservative and corrupt factions of the Institutional Revolutionary Party. The prosecutor met with Carlos Salinas to present the analysis of the video in which a plot to assassinate Colosio is warned, where the participation of at least 7 people was assured. The president authorized the dissemination of the results. On Monday, April 4th, Montes informed the media that the aggression towards the Institutional Revolutionary Party candidate was the result of a concerted action. But the story would take a different turn. The line of investigation changed when personality tests were conducted on Aburto and his notebooks were analyzed, the famous record book, which began to shape the profile as a single intellectual and material author. Without evidence against the other accused, the lone killer thesis began to gain strength. 3.5 months after the announcement that Colosio had understood an ambush, Miguel Montes appeared on the news, saying exactly the opposite. With no new evidence found in favor of concerted action, he considered the investigation exhausted, so he asserted that Mario Aburto was the only planner and perpetrator of the homicide, motivated by personal political issues. Mario Aburto was found guilty in 1995 of the murder of Luis Donaldo Colosio Murrieta and sentenced to 45 years in prison. But with the filing of an appeal, the sentence was reduced to 42 years in jail. However, this imprisonment would cause a stir. On December 16, 2004, a unitary court based in Toluca sentenced him to 45 years in prison. Later on, thanks to the benefits of good behavior, he was able to have parole in the year 2014 after serving 20 years in prison. Mario Aburto Martinez, who is 50 years old, is now dedicated to preaching the Word of God. Although suspicions were perhaps inevitable in a society where the murders of political dissidents were not resolved, and where promises of democracy and a more equitable distribution of wealth were idyllic things, the passage of time left the murder behind and democracy remained present. On the day of the 25th anniversary of the murder, Netflix presented a documentary called Crime Story Colosio. This is a series based on the facts that detail the events that shocked Mexico in the 90s. This Mexican production is not a documentary, but a fiction series based on real events, where doubts still remain quite present to this day. That concludes the video on Colosio's assassination. Many of you requested this in the comments. So I decided to listen to you and we prepared this investigation. I hope you found what we put together interesting. If you found it interesting, please leave your like below. Subscribe if you haven't done so yet. I invite you to check out the other videos on this channel. My name is Magnus Mephisto and this is The Day That